So you're in the grocery store and you're walking down the honey aisle because you need to stock up on honey. And on the shelf, in a tiny little 6-ounce container or 3-ounce container, you see a jar that says whipped Manuka honey, and it's for $68. And you're thinking to yourself, what is so special about this honey that causes it to be $68? And you think nothing of it, so you just walk on by, you drive home, and then you Google Manuka honey. And you're reading and you're going through list after list of all of these reported great health benefits that you can only get from Manuka honey. And you ask yourself, is this really the case? Well, let's talk about the science behind that.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists. Welcome on back to The Science Behind That podcast. I'm your host, Atticus Hamilton. And as you heard in the intro, today we are going to be talking about Manuka honey and if it's really everything that it's cracked up to be, if it's really as unique and special as everyone says it is. So, but first, before we get into that, ladies and gentlemen, please go grab yourselves a nice hot cup of coffee, add a little bit of maple syrup to it, and we'll jump right in. Also, this episode came to me as a suggestion from one of you faithful viewers out there. Thank you, Mike. Mike sent me an email about this topic, actually, and he was like, Atticus, I'm really curious about Manuka honey, and I see it in the grocery store all the time. It's significantly more expensive than normal honey, but is it actually worth it? Are the claims about Manuka honey worth it? Well, thank you for the episode suggestion, Mike, and we're going to talk about that today. One more thing, ladies and gentlemen, I recently implemented, a new feature for the podcast on Spotify. If you're listening to it on that platform, now underneath each episode, you'll see a question, and it'll say what did you think about this episode? You can click on that and actually reply directly to that in a little prompt terminal and a little answer terminal, and that will send those replies directly to me on Spotify. And so if you don't want to send me an email at thesciencebt@gmail.com, that's totally fine. But if you're listening on Spotify and you still, have a suggestion for an idea or want to tell me what I'm doing good or bad, you can reply directly to that in Spotify. So jumping in here, first, what is Manuka honey? Well, Manuka honey is it's honey that's produced in New Zealand and Australia by pollinating Manuka flowers with European honeybees. So, in case you don't know, there's a lot of different species of bees out there, but for the most part, honey is either made from European or Russian honeybees in terms of honey that people consume. All bee species out there produce a form of honey, but the honey that humans consume are either European or Russian or Siberian honeybees. And so Manuka honey is produced by creating a culture, a hive of one of those three types of honeybees in New Zealand or Australia, where there are Manuka flowers, and just letting them pollinate the Manuka flowers. Now, Manuka flowers, they produce a nectar, just like any other flower, that contains a variety of different phenols that in their normal form, they kind of function as a zygosmogen. So in the research I did, I found out that there's a variety of different phenols within this nectar that are not really active, but upon ingestion by the bees and then chemical modification by the bees as well within the hive, it changes the activity of those phenols into more active compounds. And we'll discuss that in a little bit here when we talk about the, whether the antibiotic effects of Manuka honey are legitimate. So just going online here and Googling Manuka honey, I got a nice compilation of different, claims. People say it has antibacterial effects, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory properties. Along with that, people also say it's very, very good at wound healing. So we're going to talk about all of that today, starting with antibacterial. Sorry, I had to take a sip of my coffee there because I really like coffee. All right, so jumping right in. Antibiotic activity of Manuka honey. So first things first, all honey has antibiotic activity, but the method of action for different honeys tends to be different based on what is in it, where the bees pollinated the honey from. So there is one type of honey out there from an unknown source. So, it could be a honey that was produced by using genetically modified bees. I'm not sure. But there is a honey out there that actually contains active B. defensin 1. And some of you are like, what is B. defensin 1? B. defensin 1 is a peptide that has extremely potent antibacterial and antimicrobial properties, because it's produced by the bees to keep the hive healthy and safe from infection. And there is a honey out there that does have B. defensin 1 as an active compound within the honey, but I don't think it's on the market. I think it's more of like a research honey. Because the fact is that people have known that honey has micro or antibacterial properties for a very long time. And so there has been a lot of research done on honey, not only, to identify what these compounds are that are giving them the potency, but also to sort of develop pharmaceuticals based on these that can be more effective for, wound treatment and infection control. But Manuka honey, so most honey, a lot of the antibiotic activity for most honeys, excluding that one that has B. defensin 1, comes in two parts. Number one is hydrogen peroxide. So number one is hydrogen peroxide, and number two is phenols. So pretty much all honeys have some type of phenols, and phenols and terpenes are aromatic compounds generally that are produced by plants, and plants produce them for various reasons. A lot of them being either communication or defense. So plants will produce phenols and terpenes to defend themselves from both predators in the insect world and infection. And that's why a lot of plants out there, including mangroves, produce these compounds that actually show to be effective in wound treatment or antibacterial properties because they're designed for that purpose. But in the case of Manuka honey, it has been shown that Manuka honey possesses an interesting compound called methylglyoxal. Now, what is methylglyoxal? Well, methylglyoxal is just a very reactive dicarbonyl compound that's produced as a byproduct of glycolysis. Now, methylglyoxal is extremely potent, and it really does not like DNA or RNA. So it will, you could think of it as a free radical, even though it's not a free radical, but it'll function in a similar way to a free radical, whereas where it will bind to the backbone of DNA or RNA and it'll break it apart in the same way that a free radical will, but a little bit more aggressively. Now, that being said, you may be like, well, Atticus, then isn't it toxic to humans, Manuka honey? The surprising thing is, despite the presence of the methylglyoxal, you would think it would be, it's not. And there's actually no literature that suggests that it is. So that seems to suggest that there's something else within the Manuka honey that is regulating the activity of the methylglyoxal to be selectively toxic towards bacteria. Now, I did find a paper that tested Manuka's honey activity against a variety of different bacterias, and along with viruses and fungi, and it was not very effective at all against fungal infections, which is interesting. But it was extremely effective against bacteria. And it was effective even to the point of destroying all but one species of bacteria's biofilms. Now, for those of you who are not in microbiology, biofilms are really irritating, especially in the medical field, because what a biofilm is it's a structure that bacteria form where the bacteria are basically all linked together and they cover a surface, and through that process they can share microbial resistance factors, and they all upregulate their expression of antibiotic resistance factors. And it makes it very, very hard to treat biofilms. However, it has been demonstrated that Manuka honey, potentially because of the presence of the methyl glyoxal, is extremely effective in removing and destroying these biofilms, along with planktonic bacteria, which means bacteria that are not in a biofilmed state. And so ultimately, the answer of why is Manuka honey so effective at destroying bacteria, we don't really know. It's thought currently the most widely accepted belief is that the methyl glyoxal has something to play, or has a role to play. But unlike normal honey, Manuka honey does not have high levels of hydrogen peroxide. So it has to be that there's methyl glyoxal in here functioning along with another phenol or some other compound that's showing extreme antimicrobial effectiveness. Additionally, it is also demonstrated that Manuka honey can significantly alter a bacterium's size and shape through altering its septal ring, which basically controls the size and shape of bacterial cells, and that can result in inadequate nutrient transfer across the cell's surface, which could potentially result in cell death. So you also have that component as well, that the Manuka honey has been demonstrated to be modifying the shape and the size of these bacteria, along with potentially destroying their DNA through the action of methyl glyoxal and some other activity through compounds that we are just not sure of yet. So in addition to this, we also have the wound activity. Now, this was interesting. So researching the wound healing activity was interesting because, much like what I expected, Manuka honey isn't accelerating wound healing. However, there's a lot of data that shows that, particularly in one case, there was a patient that had an abscess on his leg, on his thigh, right over his vastus medialis muscle. He had a very large abscess that measured in 5.5 centimeters in diameter. However, after bandaging that abscess with Manuka-soaked bandages and changing them every day for a week, that abscess went down from 5.5 centimeters in diameter to less than 2 centimeters in diameter. So what's actually going on here? Is it that Manuka is stimulating mesenchymal stem cell activity? No. What's going on here is twofold. We already know that Manuka honey is very effective in killing bacteria, and particularly biofilms. One of the big contributing factors to failure in wound healing is biofilm formation. So if a patient has a very large wound, and I'm not talking like a paper cut, I'm talking like an abscess, a deep puncture or laceration, large wounds with a lot of surface area that microbial agents could cover and contaminate, you generally see a lot of biofilm formation, especially post-operatively. That's why antibiotic salves are administered to reduce the formation of biofilms. So by applying these Manuka-soaked bandages, the Manuka honey itself, and whatever active compounds are within it, they're killing off the biofilms so they cannot form, allowing the body to just focus on repairing that tissue as opposed to fighting off infection. Because when you have a biofilm there, you have the bacteria that are metabolizing the dead and dying tissue, and you have the immune system that's fighting the bacteria, and so there's less energy that's going to focus rebuilding that tissue and more going to destroying the biofilm. So by applying the Manuka soaked bandages, basically allows the body to just focus on repairing that damaged tissue. And of course, the other part of this is that just like a variety of other medicinal plant substances out there, mangrove root, surprisingly, is very effective in wound healing. Reishi mushrooms, Peptosporus birchulinum, which is the birch polypore mushroom. All of these compounds, or all of these plants, fungi, or medicinal sources for wound healing have one thing in common, which is antioxidants. Antioxidants are found in very high levels in Manuka honey. And as we've discussed many times on this podcast, antioxidants prevent the formation of free radicals, which destroy tissue very effectively and hinder in the wound healing process. So by applying Manuka-soaked bandages to wounds, you have the antimicrobial and antibiofilm activity of the honey, and you also have antioxidant activity. So the body can just focus on repairing the tissue and does not have free radicals or bacteria seeking to destroy the tissue. And then as for the other arguments of soothing cough and whatnot, I couldn't find any literature that suggests that Manuka does that any better than normal honey. However, it does appear to, at the end of the day, be better suited for antibacterial properties than maybe other honeys out there on the market, except for potentially that one that contains B defensin 1, which is unnamed and from an unknown source currently, so that doesn't really help anyone. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Science Behind That. I had a lot of fun recording it. And at the end of this episode, I hope that you, now understand, you can now make a good decision of whether or not Manuka honey is right for you. I think the literature does seem to support the anecdotal claims about it, that it's good for wound healing and antibiotic activity. And I know down the line there will be a lot more research to come on the effectiveness of Manuka honey for those two things, and hopefully within the next 5 years we will get an actual name for the compounds themselves within the honey that have the biggest effect in reducing bacterial growth and allowing for better wound healing. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hope you have a fantastic Friday, great weekend, and I will see you all on Monday. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, stand up and question everything.